All right, welcome, friends. This is part two of our first day of lecture. We're going to breeze through a little bit of housekeeping, and then we will jump into actual coding itself. So a little bit of housekeeping, just like we talked about, I would read up to arrays because that is what we're going to be talking about today. Hopefully we can get to arrays. If not, I might talk about it tomorrow in office hour. Your assignment is to go all the way through Algo app level 1. And discussion questions, again, those are two of those if you're in accelerated, one of them if you're in flex. Those are due by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday. So please make sure you knock those out. Go do all of them right now to be okay. You do have an exam starting this weekend. So I know that probably seems stressful. We're going to talk a lot more about it on Thursday. So don't stress out about it. There's plenty of time. We're going to be okay. It's not super crazy. It's not something you have to study for or anything like that. As long as you're staying with the core assignments and you're staying kind of with the program, you're going to be just fine. Tomorrow we do have a 2-hour office hour. So this is, again, unique to programming basics. It's not something that you're going to have in any of the other classes. Usually it's going to be office hour and then lecture. So it's an hour of each. But then again, if you're accelerated, that's 3 days a week. So 3 hours total of office hour, 3 hours of lecture. If you're flex, it's 2 days a week. So 2 hours of office hour, 2 hours of lecture. And again, I already talked about Discord or class calendar, Dojo Hall. And occasionally you will get invited to Dojo events. Now, if there's, Git, or if you're wanting to learn about Git, or there's other things that our TAs will put on, you will get an invite. And if there is anything, an instructor will say, hey, on Tuesday at blank time, there's this event. Here's the link if you want to sign up, et cetera, et cetera. Cool. Okay. So we're going to actually start diving into a little bit of code. But first, we're going to talk about kind of software development as a whole, kind of a high end, or high level understanding of software development. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to create a first JavaScript file. The way that you do it is you put whatever the file name is. So I usually like to say main, and then you say .js. Now I'm in VS Code. So if you haven't downloaded VS Code, this is what I'm using. If you want to use anything other like Atom or Sublime, you are welcome to do that. Every instructor is going to be using VS Code. So if you do have an issue, then, we might not be able to help you. I'm in a folder, and we can talk about folder structure tomorrow in office hour, but I'm in a folder called Week 1 Tuesday. And all I did to create a new file is I clicked this little page right here. This creates a new folder within my folder, or I can create a new file. So I'm going to create a new file called main dot. And when I say dot, I say what kind of file type it is. And so we're going to have HTML files, CSS files, Python files, JavaScript files, React files. We're going to have all kinds of types. But for JavaScript, which is what we're going to be writing a lot in, I'm going to put JS. Now you see right here, it popped up as JS. That's a extension that I have. I can try to figure out and remember which one it is after class today, and I'll try to tell you guys that in Discord. But there's other, like, I think if you just go to the extension thing right here and say file icons, I think there's a bunch of different types that show up. But I just say my name of my file, dot, and then whatever the file type is, and that will create my file for me. Cool. There is another tool, just like Alfonso said, that I would encourage, because I've got something called Node.js that's already downloaded. Now, that's something that we'll talk about tomorrow in office hour. If you don't want to download anything yet, you can go to codepen.com.io. And I'll put this in chat. And this is a free playground for you to code. So you can do HTML, which we don't need. Don't worry about it. We have CSS, which right now we don't need, or JavaScript, right? So let's see if we can get rid of this. I don't want. I don't know how to. We'll write here. Ooh, I hate this. Okay. We'll just write here. Okay. So what I want to talk about is, and I'll do it in CodePen and I'll do it here as well, is we want to talk from a high level about software development. Now, when you hear software development, there's a lot of different things that you can have, right? If somebody says they're a developer, there's lots of different types, right? There's fintech, which is financial technologies and algorithms for banking and buying stocks. There's mobile development, there's desktop development, there's web development, there's AI, as you guys have heard, I'm sure a million times now. So there's a whole bunch of different types of applications and software that we can build, right? We can build stuff that's specifically for a phone and operates for your phones, either on iOS or Android. Those are kind of the two operating systems. We can build stuff that people can interact with on the web, which is what we're going to be doing a lot of. And then you could also build desktop applications, things that people download on their desktop or computer, and they can interact with them in the same way that I've got Zoom and Slack and all of that. Those are desktop applications. Or Discord, I have it here on my desktop. That's a desktop application. But at a high end, there's lots of different things that are going on. But from a high end, there's really three big portions of it. There's our front end, our back end, and our database. So can anybody tell me, what is my front end? Well, any ideas? What you look at? Okay.
Everything you see.
Everything you see? Is it something that you see or who sees it?
The user,
Like the customer or whoever.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's my front end is usually what my user sees. So let me put user. Right. That's what they interact with. If I go to Facebook and I go and I see buttons and I see where my friends are and how everything is placed, that is all front end. What colors you're using, what flow from buttons. And yes, there's like specific button flows that people use. That is all your front end. So let me type front end. Oops. Okay. Can anybody tell me before we get to actually, yeah. Now, what is this blue square here? Is our back end. Can anybody tell me kind of what our back end is? Any ideas? Like, what is the role of the back end?
All the magic
Processing transactions.
Transactions. What do you mean by that?
Card transactions, credit card purchases.
That could be maybe one of them. And actually, I would argue that that would be separated, but we'll talk about that in a second. But I see it. There's a lot of kind of people putting stuff in the chat. It's tech that moves and manages the data. It's the engine that drives the code. It's functions of what the user interacts with to display on the front end. Yes, our backend is kind of the hive mind, right? So every user that does something, if they click on a button and they want to add a friend, that creates what we call a request. And we're going to learn all about request and response cycles in web fundamentals. But it creates a request to our backend and says, hey, the user did something. They pressed a button. And my backend goes, great. I've got some instructions for when a user presses the add a friend button. This is what I need to do. Right. And so it sort of is just a lot of, hey, if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. Yes. I'm seeing lots of stuff in the chat. That's great. Logic. It runs the jobs. It can do some security for us as well. Yeah. It's really just the functionality of your application, whether it's web or desktop, or it is mobile. They all have some sort of functionality, some backend, right? It's the logic behind our entire application. Now, sometimes, and we're going to continue with our Facebook request friend idea, our user clicks a button and says, okay, they found me on Facebook, and they go, cool, I want to add Will to Facebook. They click the button. It sends this request to my backend. My backend goes, okay, great. I do have some instructions for when a user clicks a button to add a friend, but all of their friends are stored on my database, right? And so then it says, hey, we need to update that information. And let me write database. It said, okay, we need to update that information. And we need to add this new person to a friend. So now they have one more friend. And what the database does, it says, okay, great. I have done that. It gives back that request. It says, cool, it's done. We're good to go. They're added. So then now what my backend does is it says, okay, if that's successful, if we've added them, then now let's go ahead and show on my front end that person and their friends, right? They now have a new friend once they've been accepted or whatever. They now have a new friend and our user now can see this friend. So if you think of like a private Instagram page and then that person accepts it, cool. Now they can see all their photos, right? And so that's the request response cycle. But from a high level, what is happening is the user's making some sort of request. Our backend has the logic. Sometimes it has to hit our database. Sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes it doesn't have to do anything with our database, does some logic and then sends it back to the front end. But this is really what's happening for most applications. Now, Dalton had a great idea and said, it could be like processing transactions. This is a little bit high level. So if I'm losing you, don't worry. It's not necessary for you to know now. But there also is another tool that we're going to be implementing. Can anybody tell me if it's an outside tool that we can rely on? Anybody know what that is? It's 3 letters. Yeah, Kaylin, it's an API, application programming interface. So usually, Dalton, you were very, very right with like processing transactions, but we can use tools from other companies. Like Stripe is a great one for processing transactions, right? Or if I want to have the weather or Google Maps on my application, I don't need to go build Google Maps. I can just bring in Google Maps to my application. And so that's what we call an API. So then again, you make a request to the API, you give it some information, API gives that, and you can take that and now they have a map on your front end, something like that. So Dalton, you were very, very close. Usually that stuff's going to be handled by an API, but the logic to get that information from a transaction to an API is absolutely the back end. So way to go. Okay. So from a high level, this is everything you're doing for the entire bootcamp. We're going to be focusing for web fundamentals. We're going to be focusing on the front end. When we get into full stack, you might hear this word full stack because there's front end developers, there's back end, and there's full stack developers, and there's database engineers. Full stack means that you are able to write in the front end. You can build front end. You can manipulate CSS or JavaScript or HTML. You also can write backend logic in one of the languages, whether it's Java or JavaScript does have a backend as well, and Python. You can talk to a database. I saw somebody put MongoDB. That is a type of database. Somebody else put SQL. That's another type of database. So you can relate and talk to those databases. If you take all 3 stacks, you're going to be dealing with actually both of those. And a full stack person is somebody that can do all of that. They can write backend logic, they can write front end logic, and they can talk to a database. Now, usually at a big company, there are full stack engineers, but they're also just backend and just front end and just database engineers. But when you're dealing with full stack, which is what this program is, you're going to be learning front end, back end, database, and then we're going to be dealing with APIs as well. So are there any questions on sort of this flow? It doesn't need to be super, super clear now, but it's just an idea of what an application kind of looks like. Are there any questions? You guys put a 1 in the chat if this makes sense, put a 0 if it does not, or something lower than a 1 if you're a little bit confused. Cool. Great. I also like to point out that I sometimes like to use images. I sometimes like to write code. If there's a specific way that you like to learn, there's a specific way or something that I can do to help your learning experience. That doesn't mean that I will only do it that way, but I will definitely try to implement that. So feel free to message me on Discord or email me and say, hey, you know what? I really learned well if you blank, and I'll try to build that into. If you're more of a visual person, I do try to put in some visuals so that way you can understand that as well. So hopefully that helps. Okay. So that is from a high level, kind of what an application looks like and what we're doing. And when we're talking full stack, that's what we are dealing with. Okay. So there are some skills that I just wrote out here. I'm not going to go through all of these for time's sake, but here's some skills from a full stack engineer that you're going to need. Obviously, you're going to need to problem solve, right? You're going to have to deal with problems throughout your coding process. You have to learn how to communicate. That's why we have Discord and we ask you to write in Discord. You have to be able to technically write. You have to understand what's going on and write, i.e. writing in Discord. Here's what I'm trying. Here's what it's supposed to be doing. That thing. You have to work in a team, obviously coding, learning. This job is something that you will always be learning. I am learning all the time. I'm upskilling all the time because tech is always changing. Time management is a big piece. If you are somebody who waits till the last second to try to do everything, it's going to be really challenging. And that's coming from somebody who always waited till the last second. So try your best to at least put in a couple, just make yourself do the Pomodoro, where you can do 20 minutes and then 5 or 10 minute break, and then 20 minutes, 5 or 10 minute break. And dealing with project management. There's a really funny adage about developers is that you will always start a new project. You don't finish the other one, but you always start a new one. I am super duper guilty of this. So, but being able to see something through is a really important thing, especially when you come to your portfolio as well, which that is down the line. You don't need to worry about that right now. Cool. Okay. How we feeling? Are we doing okay, guys? I know that this was a lot today for our first class, but are we excited? Hopefully that this has not just been a snooze fest. We're actually going to get into some coding now. Perfect. 1s and 0s. You guys are already, look at you guys already picking up. That's amazing. Okay. So thrilled. I love that, Nicole. Let's go. Okay. So now we're actually going to finally jump into some code. Okay. And you guys have probably heard this. You're probably familiar with these. If you've ever taken kind of algebra on or upward, you've probably dealt with variables, but can anybody tell me what is a variable and what might we use a variable for in development?
A placeholder to hold data.
Yes, James, exactly. That's exactly it. It is a way that we can tell this language, hey, here's a piece of information I want you to remember, right? I need you to remember what this is. Now, each language operates differently. Yes, Sarah, exactly. It stores information and is retrievable. Absolutely. Kaylin, it's something that changes. Sometimes we'll see that there's actually some ways that we can write some stuff to prevent it from changing. But each language is different in how it deals with declaring variables. So if it's the first time you're doing it or saying a variable, it's what we call declaring a variable. And so JavaScript, there's really 3 ways we can do it. And I know that kind of sounds like, oh, that's too many. There's really 2 ways you want to do it, but there is a 3rd way that I'm going to show you in a second. Actually, we'll start with the 3rd way. So let's go way back to like Netscape days. If you don't know what Netscape is, me neither, it's okay. But this is the story of JavaScript. Netscape needed to compete with Microsoft. And so in 6 days, they had an engineer, a developer who is like, 10x developer, meaning that they're incredible. They built JavaScript and the whole language in 6 days, which is actually pretty funny because there are some weird things that happen with JavaScript that we're not going to get into now, but we definitely will in Web Fundamentals. But it was built in 6 days, right? And so it's pretty fascinating on how it works. But if you wanted to create a variable, they were not at all sneaky with it. You would just put the word var. Var is a keyword in JavaScript to say, hey, I'm declaring a variable. So I'm going to say first name. So that is my name equals, and I'm going to put Will. Okay. So I have now declared my first variable. Now you see this squiggly line here, and it said unexpected var use let or const. First off, what is this squiggly line? You might be asking. What the squiggly line is what we call a linter. And what a linter is in our IDE. So Visual Studio Code, lots of other ones, again, Atom or whatever. I just say use Visual Studio Code. It's definitely industry standard. Most companies use it. It's the most popular and it's free. So absolutely. But what it basically is, it's preemptively trying to help you with errors. Like, hey, you should use let or const. We're going to get to that. But again, we're talking at the very beginning of JavaScript. And so we could say var first name equals Will, but they ran into an issue because what happens is, let's say you had a huge code base. What then could happen is like another developer could be working and not knowing that you had already had a variable called first name, and then they redeclare a variable called first name trait, right? And so there became an issue, right? Because they're saying, okay, great. We're seeing that we can overwrite a name and redeclare it, and that can be an issue, right? Because there's really only one way to declare a variable. So what they did is they changed it, and they used something called let and const. So now instead of var, you can do let first name. Oops. Something to know about me, guys, is though I type for a living, I am terrible at it. So if you guys are not good at typing, just know that that's a-okay. I'm terrible at it. So, so instead of var, you can just say let. Now they operate the same way. And the second one is const. I'm going to say last name equals Calhoun. I'm also using my wife's keyboard and it's tough. Okay. Here I've got const last name Calhoun. Now, does anybody know the difference between let and const? Anybody know? One can change. Yeah, exactly. So let is what we call immutable, or sorry, mutable. And const is what we call immutable. Oy, 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 oy. Sorry, guys. Now, what that means is when I declare let, if I wanted to later on, let's say I got famous, my middle name's Cody, and I wanted to go by William Cody, just like Buffalo Bill, I could say first name equals William Cody. And that's okay. I can change the values here. Right? Const is once it's declared, you can't change it. So if I were to say last name equals, I don't know, pizza, you see that there's a squiggly line, right? And it's saying, hey, correct this or use let in declaration because I created it as a const. You can't change it after you declare it. And so that's the difference between let and const. Now, var, you can. So var, you can sort of think about is similar to let. There's some nuancy differences that we don't need to get into now. But just know that with var and let, you can change it after you declare it. Const is a constant, meaning you cannot change it after you declare it. Cool. So, but this is us declaring variables. We are creating variables. Now, I did see somebody ask, what's the difference between a single quote and double quote? There isn't one. Both work a-okay. But I would encourage you to do double quote, and we'll talk about that when we get to strings here in a second. So let's break down a couple things from our variable. And then I'll ask for some questions if you guys have them, or I'll look through the chat as well. We have to use this keyword called let, and that is us telling JavaScript, hey, I'm declaring a new variable. We use the key, or we use our variable name. Now notice, I did not say first space name. In our variables, we cannot have a space. So there's a couple different ways we can do it. In JavaScript, we use what we call camel case, meaning the first letter is lowercase. And every new word after that, it's all combined, but every new word starts with a capital letter. So if I wanted to say, first name today, let's say I change my name all the time. You see that F is lowercase, and the name and today are both uppercase. That's what we call camel case. Now, if you use, you might see other ones like this. It's called snake case. This is how you do it in Python. It will technically work. So that's fine. But I would say that as a JavaScript developer, you want to use what the industry sort of standard is and what other developers are going to use. So we use camel case for our names. So on the left side, we have our declaration and saying, hey, whenever I refer to this piece of information called Will, or this piece of information of Will, I'm going to refer to it as first name. So when I say first name, here's what I want you to come back and bring me. We have an equal sign. And then here we have our value. Now, I'm not going to get into what is that quote yet, because that's going to come here in just a bit. But we have our value here. This is what our variable is staying. And then at the end, we have this semicolon. Now, if I didn't have this semicolon, it would still technically work. JavaScript has gotten good enough that it will infer that there's a semicolon there. But there is times that can actually come back and kind of haunt you and kind of make your code have an error. So I would just say, as you are practicing, make sure that you are, kind of adding that because it will be super helpful for you in the long run. Okay. Now I'm going to take a pause there. Are there any questions I'm going to go through the chat. Are there any questions? Feel free to come off mute. So somebody said, if you use single or double quotes, do you have to stay with the same, or can you go back and forth as Will has? So you can go back and forth. I would definitely say you cannot do like this. That will not work. So they have to be the same. And JavaScript will infer them both as that. But if I wanted to, let's say I just wanted to create let statement equals Will Calhoun's balloon. I love to say double quotes because, and I always typically will do double quotes. I don't know why I did single quotes. I typically will always do it because if I have an apostrophe in my statement or in my string, this is a string, we're gonna get to that in a second. That's okay. That allows it, right? If this was a single quote, what it does is it closes it, right? So it's like, this is where it starts. This is where it ends. And you get a little error because it doesn't know what's going on after this, because it can be kind of dumb at sometimes, right? So I like to do double quotes just in case I have an apostrophe. There's other ways to get around it, but I think just for what you guys are doing right now, I would say start with double quotes. That way, if you do have an apostrophe, you're A-okay. I see there's a hand raised. Go ahead, Graylin.
So just kind of looking at this from top to bottom, the variable first you created, does it automatically assume a version between let, const, or do you have to do that each time?
Yeah, so great question. You do have to say if it's let or const the first time you declare it. Now, if you want to refer to it after it's been declared, so if I'm changing it, but I can we'll get into what console.log is. But if I wanted console log first name, I can do that. I just have to declare it first. If I didn't have this line, what it would do is there would be an error. If I did that, you can see I need to add let because I don't have a declaration here. And so it would say, hey, I don't know what first name is. So that's where I have to do a let, a const, or a var. I would say use let or const. But you might see var. I think on the platform you see var, so var also works. Like that's okay. Yeah, great question though. Okay, chat is blown up. I love it. Let's see. So var, let, the exact same thing. You can sort of think about it like that. There are some nuancy things that when we get into web fundamentals, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the differences between var and let, but for right now, just for declaration, you can think about it as the same thing. Again, on the platform, I think on the Algo app, because it's a little bit older, it does use var, so feel free to use var there, but I just wanted you to be available and know what let and const are. Go ahead, Evan.
I'm curious. So I see I was looking at the assignments and I saw that some of them you can still use I guess for this instance let, but it's able to differentiate between whether it's a number or if it's a string.
Mhm.
Is that still the case, or is there anything that we need to make sure? Because I remember in like C++, you had to specify, no, this is a number and this is a string.
Yeah,
for each.
great. Yeah, great question. So JavaScript is what we call an interpreted language. And so what's really nice about it and why people like JavaScript and Python to start with is you're exactly right, Evan. And C++ and Java and C#, all these other languages, you have to declare, hey, this is the type it is. We're going to get to data types here in a second, but it's a string, it's a number, it's a Boolean. Here, JavaScript, based off of how we write it. So if we do the double quotes or the single quotes, it'll say, oh, I'm interpreting this as a string. Which can be good. It can cause some issues, which we'll talk and sort of see. But yeah, you don't. So let and var both just interpret that as whatever data type that, whether it's string or number or Boolean or whatever it is, array, dictionary, all of those, object, not dictionary, object. It'll infer that. It interprets it all, which is nice. It's easier to write, but it can be a little bit slower than something like a Java, or definitely like a C++. So again, I see somebody asked what's the difference. Trey's right, it's scope. I think that is actually outside of the scope of today. I think it's too far. So you'll learn about that in Web Fundamentals. Just know that var and let are pretty similar. But I think the only thing is if you're getting an issue on the Algo app and you're using let, switch it to var and see if that works. So somebody said, I never understood the spacing in the code. How do you know how many lines are in between? You don't have to. Spacing for JavaScript's not a big deal. Python is where that really becomes. And I think you can turn on like white dot. There's like little dots so you can see that. So, but spacing is not an important, like that was like that. That's okay. It just skips all those lines. Great questions though. Yeah, Python it uses code blocks, and so that's why spacing, Kalen, that's why spacing is important. So again, somebody said, can you use let interchangeably in Algo app? I'm not quite sure if you're getting an error with let, switch over to var and see if that is the difference. So somebody said, can we use both let and const in the same sheet? Absolutely. You're going to have tons of variables. So just like this, you're able to use it a-okay. You will have many, many, many variables that you'll use let and or const for. Cool. Okay, so that's us declaring variables. Now, you might have wondered when Evan and I were talking about declaring types, what does that mean? Well, in development, there's a bunch of different types and what we call data types. So what our code is doing is it's saying, okay, I've got a declared variable called first name, and it needs to know how to store it, because also within these types is different kind of functionalities or methodologies that you can do, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But just know that there's 3 primitive types. So these are kind of your base types. Your first one's going to be a string. Next one's going to be a number. And the last one's going to be a Boolean. So let's talk about that. A string is what we see here. It is started by either a double quote or a single quote and finished by a double quote or single quote. And it is any characters in between that. It can be spaces. It could be a whole, it could be all of the Lord of the Rings trilogy in one string, right? It can be a huge piece. It's just any characters. I could have numbers in this as well. That will be considered a string. If it starts here and ends here and it's within it, that is going to be a string, and that's how it stays. And that's how it is kind of remembered in our memory of our application. So that's a string. There's some things that we can do with strings that when we get to arrays, I'll kind of bring this back. So put that back in the back of your head, but it's anything that we want to do. Again, we can do double or single quotes, but if you wanted to do something like this, where you've got an apostrophe, you have to do double quotes and then a single quote in there. Because we've seen that, if you do it as all single quotes, there becomes an issue there. Again, there is really no like limit to what you can put within a string. But yeah, there's no limit to what you can put within a string. It just has some functionality that you can have. So that's strings. Next one is going to be numbers. Are there any questions on a string? we'll keep talking about strings as we move forward, but just you can kind of think about it that as right now, base thing is your sentences, your words, any sort of thing that's a character that doesn't need like numeric functionality or is not like a true or false, which we're going to get to in a bit. So really anything outside of that, it's going to be a string. Okay. Now we have another primitive type that's called numbers. So if I say var age equals 31, right? This, though I don't have to do anything else. I'm going to do let. Somebody asked, could strings continue to the next line? Yep, absolutely. Strings could be, this entire thing could be one string. Like let lorem. So lorem ipsum is just like fake words. And so I could just use something like this, and this is all just one string. Yeah, so you could do that. It could be something as big as this would be a-okay. So it can be huge if you wanted it to be. Great question there, Tyler. Okay, so for numbers, here I've declared same way that we declare another variable, age, but you can already see if I hover over, it says number. Again, JavaScript interprets, there's no quotation marks around this, and it's not true or false, and it's got numeric values of 31. So therefore it must be age, or it must be a number. Now with that, I can say, you know, like let's say that I let age plus 1 equal age plus 1. What I can do is when I have a number, I can actually do some arithmetic on it. So if I were to console log is a tool that we can use to see some sort of value. So here, if I were to run this, I would get an error. Oh, because of this. We'll get to running. I'll show you how to run code tomorrow, outside of like CodePen. But we see that I get 32, right? It takes this 31. It console logged my first name first and foremost. And then it takes this 31. So age plus 1 is my variable. It went to age and it says, oh, the value at age is 31. So then it says, okay, age plus 1 equals 31 plus 1. Age plus 1 is 32. Right? So you can do some sort of arithmetic. You can do multiplication. You can do division. You can do subtraction. So with numbers, you have access to that, right? Have access to that. Okay. Now you can, if you wanted to, get to a point where you could say, like, this is where the different types and it being interpreted can be a little bit confusing. Let's say birthday month equal 05. Now, when you've got a string and a number and you try to add them together, JavaScript does some funny things and it will actually get confused and just, it will bring them together, and we'll see here in a second. So if I console .log birthday month plus age, and I run this, I get 0531, right? Because this was a string and this is a number. And again, remember, it was built in 6 days. So it does some weird things. Instead of it being an error and saying, hey, these are 2 different data types, it'll just be like, oh, let's just convert this into a string and then just like figure it out. And so it'll just add it to the end, right? And so now this whole thing is a string. It's a weird nuancey thing with JavaScript. So you have to be able to know how, you have to know your data types, right? And what you're working with, or else you're going to get something like this. You might be wanting, you know, it to be something different. Obviously that's a weird, like birthday month, and then age is not something you normally would add. But as you can see, I'm just wanted to show you, you can add a string to a number and it will interpret that and kind of be weird and nuancy and just make it all one string. Okay. The last of the primitive data types is what we call Boolean. These are super easy. They are just your true and false. So, like let is hungry equals true. True. In JavaScript, it is a lowercase true and a lowercase false. So other languages are different. If you come from a Pythonic background, you might see uppercase true and uppercase false. In JavaScript, we do that. Booleans are going to be huge when we come to conditionals on Thursday. It'll be a huge thing when we get to conditionals, but just know that I can have a true or false. And then if I were to refer to that, it'll either be true or false. That's only two things a Boolean can be. If something is true or it's false, it is what we consider a Boolean. That's it. There's no other like neutral or anything like that. It's either true or it's false. And that is a type Boolean there. Okay. So I'm pausing at primitive data types. It's kind of a little bit, it's kind of a lot really quickly. So I want to pause. Are there any questions on that? Any questions on everything I just talked about? Graylin, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify. I don't know if I missed it, but when you were talking about the string, you can't add a string and a number.
Uh-huh.
I'm missing where the 31. Is it because it doesn't have the quotes?
Yeah.
Like the
So
order does?
yeah. So because this is a string, and again, this is what I was saying, like because JavaScript is built in
That's
6
right.
days. Because this is a string, and then this is a number, JavaScript doesn't know what to do. So instead of breaking and saying, hey, these are two different types, and I can't do arithmetic on this or infer that you mean a number, what it does is says, oh, I'm going to fix it, and I'll just convert this to a string. So like this, and then now you can do this with a string. So I could say something like, const last name, and I can console log first name plus last name. That's in the ability of a string. You can do that. So if I come here, you see William Cody Calhoun, right?
Okay.
So it thinks that, oh, okay, because the first one is a string, I'm just going to convert it, and then it will be a string. And it's also a safety thing because this has, like, let's say that this had a letter in there, right? Because we can look and say, oh, well, I see that that's a number. They must have meant to add in the arithmetic, but it doesn't sort of think that, or thinks that quickly, but it's saying, okay, what if that was there? What it does is it actually converts that to prevent there from being an issue. And a kind of a runtime stoppage, it converts it to a string. That way it can just add it in no matter what. So if you're trying to do a string plus a number, it's always going to convert it to a string and then just have one longer string.
Okay.
Does
Thank
that
you.
make sense?
Yeah.
Great. Somebody asked, what do the colors mean? Nothing. That's just how that's like an extension. You can get different colors. You can do like synthwave, you can do all kinds of stuff to however you want it. I just think this is easy on the eyes. Tyler, I see you have a hand raised.
Yeah, just so typically just for like a concept idea wise, say like the birthday month. So the age would change typically, so you'd make that let. But for birthday month, would you make that like a const?
You could, yeah.
Like just
Yeah.
concept wise.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. There's a lot of things I can change in my life. I can change my name. I can change my hair color. I mean, there's a million things I could change. What I cannot change is the day that I was born. So that's a great example of a const, right? That is an unchangeable thing. I mean, I can even change my social security number if I were to get hacked, right? But my birthday is my birthday. So yeah, you could have said that would be a const and that would have been A-okay. Yeah. Great idea. Great kind of logic thinking there. Cool. Are there any other questions, friends? Okay. Thanks, Jeff, for putting a 1 in the chat. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is an array. So all of these primitive types are awesome. But sometimes we need more data than that, right? We need more than just one variable. I want to keep a bunch of different values there. Well, there's a composite type, composite meaning there's kind of adding in multiple, called an array. We're going to talk about some other composites a little bit later on. This is definitely not the only one, but this is a really, really, really important thing to know. Is an array is let some array. The way we declare it is we do these square brackets, not the curly boys or not parenthesis. We do square brackets. Again, in the same way that when JavaScript reads this quotation mark, says, okay, that's a string. It reads this square bracket and says, okay, they are creating an array. Now, what an array is, you can sort of think about it. If you've ever seen like Fantastic Beasts, that movie, it's like a Harry Potter spinoff. And he has this bag and it's just a bag, but then you can go in and reach in and bring all sorts of different things out. And it's like a whole new world. An array is kind of the same way. It's just the beginning of our bag. And I can put anything I want in there. I can put the number 6, 7, 8, 9. I can put will. I can put, true. I can put any combination. I can have it really, really, really long. I can only have it one. I can put any combination I want of multiple types, a string, a Boolean, a number. I can do multiple Booleans, multiple strings, multiple numbers. It's sort of this grab bag of being able to pair a whole bunch of different things together. I can even put variables in here. So like if I wanted first name, I can do that, right? It just is sort of this grab bag of being able to put a whole bunch of things together. It's really, really helpful when we are dealing with like addresses or certain things like that, like a list of names, players, positions, a whole bunch of things that we're going to use arrays for. But they have some built-in sort of functionalities as well. Because here we've, again, declared with let some array equal, and then we have our curly bracket. But if I wanted to target the number 9, there's a specific way I can do that. And this is something that is usually a little bit challenging for people at the very beginning, and then they pretty quickly pick it up again, or pick it up. And this is something that all languages sort of operate this way, or most languages. It'd be an anomaly if they didn't. And somebody said, does mixing data types in array confuse a program? Nope, that's what an array is for, right? To have multiple data types. In order for it to be easy, let's say I wanted to get will, right? I wanted to get the value of will. Well, what the big brain people that created JavaScript did was they said, well, we need a way to identify where will is, what position it's at. And so what they did is they said, okay, each of these are going to have a numeric value. So position 1, 2, 3, whatever. But what they said was, and just like Daniel put in the chat, it always starts at 0. So the first value is always 0. Now, one thing to note with arrays is when we are separating values, we use a comma. So then here, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth, right? All the way to the end. So it always starts at 0. So with that being said, what position is will at? Can anybody tell me in the chat? Yeah, exactly, Jeff. It's at position 4. Great job, guys. Though it's the 5th element in my array, it is at position 4. And so what's nice about that is now if I wanted to target will, I could console.log. I give the array that I'm trying to target. So here I would say some array. And then what I can do is I can give a bracket and then the index position I want to target. You guys all said 4, which I think is correct. So now if I were to come here and I run this, there's an error. Oh, yeah, that's fine. The thing I'm using to run this, the reason the error happened is because if I highlight it, it just runs that code. And I was referring to a variable up here that wasn't highlighted. So that's why I was like, I don't know what that is. So that was the error. So you see that we got will. We got will. So that's good. That's perfect. If I wanted to target 8, let's do another practice. What would I target? What number? Yeah, exactly 2. Perfect. And if I were to do that and run it, I get 8. Great job. Now, you guys ready to turn it up a notch? Just one real quick thing. Within an array, you can have a value that is an array. So you can kind of put it within itself. Okay. Now, in thinking about this, and what we know and what we just learned about arrays, if I wanted to target this value here, this 2, what could I do? How would I do that? So, okay, let's draw this out. I've got position 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because remember, though it's an array, it just counts at position 6. Okay, great. Then within position 6, I've got 0, 1, 2. So I see a lot in the chat. So yeah, just like Trey said. So you guys are saying, because Trey's saying, well, what would be how would we write that? So you guys are saying we do 6, 1. See, I get an error right here. Unexpected use of the comma operator. If I wanted to target this value, just like I'm seeing in chat, I do 6. And then I say, okay, there's a second portion for me to go into. And I do 1. Just like this. Okay, give me this value. Great. It gives me this array and it goes, now within that, go to position 1 and get me that value. So if I were to console log this, we're going to get 2. Great job, guys. Okay, I'm going to pause there. We're exactly at time anyway, and we got through everything we wanted to get through. Are there any questions on what we just learned? On composite types, on strings, on variables, on arrays? So somebody said, is there a way to have it randomly target an element in an array? Not necessarily like randomly target. I mean, Seth, we could figure that out. We could use, there's some functions. There's a random function. So we could get a random number between 0 and 6. And then it would run that function, get that value, and then put it and get it. That would be a way we could do it. But I mean, we could technically make it happen, but there's not like a built-in functionality for that. So somebody said arrays work with vars and const too. Yep, I could do var or I could do const array. That's fine. You can do var, const, or let for anything you're declaring. So somebody said, why do we use console log if we already have to declare what the variable is? Great question, Graylin. And that's probably something that I need to talk over a little bit more. Sometimes as a developer, we need to test our code. Different languages use it in a different way. Python calls it print. JavaScript calls it console log, but it's just something that we can visually see, that we can see, right? If I want to test and say, okay, I need to see, is it getting this value, right? Is it reading this correctly? Something like that. The way we use that is console log. This is not something our users ever going to do or ever going to see. It's just something really for us to test. And so with JavaScript, it's called console log. Again, you do need to have node.js downloaded in order to run JavaScript code. The other way to do it is come here. I can say var first name equals Will. This is in CodePen, and I can say console.log first name. Perfect. Oh, in order for me to save it and run it, I got to log in. But you could do this as well, right? And you just run this Missing semicolon. Lame. Come here, I analyze it. Oh. And we get will. So if you don't have node.js, feel free to use codepin.io. And you can write it and kind of test your code there. Tomorrow in office hour, I'll talk about Node.js, and we're going to do some practice with arrays because there's some different functionality that we can do. We can do .length, and we have some built-in methods that is kind of beyond the scope of today in our first class. But here's another way that you can kind of practice this as well. Okay. So somebody said, how do you target, if you have more than one array, how do you target it? That's a great question, Tyler. It's based on what we call it. So I called it some array, but I could have called this unicorn. And so the way that we target specifically that one is just whatever we call it. So if we give it the name unicorn, then we say, hey, unicorn. And then remember, just like we're declaring a variable and saying, hey, I need you to save this value. The way I'm going to refer to it is first name. And so whenever we tell our program, hey, go bring me first name, it goes and it gets this value. Same thing here. If I am saying, hey, I need you to remember this value, the way I'm going to refer to it is unicorn. Then whenever we say, hey, unicorn, it's saying, oh, I know that value. Let me go and get that for you. And so it's just by what we declare, what the variable name is. And that's for with anything, right? If I'm dealing with age +1, it's just going to refer back to whatever I said age was. So somebody asked if office hours are recorded. Yes, they are. Node.js is not a extension. It is actual Node. This is something you do need to do. I would say just do this 18.17.1. You're going to have to use this with regardless when you go to Web Fundamentals. So just download it now. It should automatically, I'm on a Mac, so it should download for Mac or Windows, whatever it is, other downloads if it doesn't read it correctly. But it should walk through pretty easily for that. Michael asked, are we going to talk push tomorrow? Yeah, we're going to talk some methodologies for arrays and just do some practice as well. Do not do current, just do this recommended for most users. Okay. Okay, are there any questions? We're 4 minutes over, and I try to be a good steward of your time. Today is just always a hard one because it's a lot of information we got to walk through. So you guys did have wonderful questions. Is there anything else I can help you with? Cool. Well, I usually try to get this recording up pretty quickly within the next, usually by the end of the night. I'm going to go do something real quick, pick up my wife, and then right after that, I should get the recording up on YouTube. And again, I will put it in a couple places. I'll put it in our class sheet, and then I'll put it right here. I have part 1 and part 2. I'll get that up on YouTube, and I'll put those hyperlinks there, and then I'll also put it on the platform where it says lectures. So other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful night, and I will stop the recording. I know that I have to stop and help one person. But other than that, if you're not that person, have a wonderful night, and we'll see you tomorrow for office hour if you can make it. And then if not, we'll see you Thursday for class. Have a great night, guys. Congratulations on your first day.